Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 207, dated March the 9th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled Mark Twain and Melville Fuller. Most Americans have at least heard of Mark Twain. We remember him as one of the greatest writers in American history. Indeed, in addition to that, he was also a well-known humorist and publisher. When you mention the name Melville Fuller, however, the response you'll probably get is, who the hell is that? Well, that response, would not be unthinkable. Indeed, Melville Fuller was the 8th Chief Justice of the United States, serving in that role from 1888 to 1910. Fuller's tenure as America's Chief Justice was relatively underwhelming, and thankfully most of the decisions of the Fuller Court have been overturned or significantly limited in their impact. Fuller himself was a staunch Democratic politician who was exceptionally conservative. Nonetheless, his greatest contribution, arguably, to the Supreme Court as an institution was the promotion of collegiality between the justices themselves, okay? Indeed, Fuller is the Chief Justice who instituted the tradition of all the members of the court shaking hands before they go and hear oral argument, as a reminder that we're all in this together, even though we may have different opinions on the issues, okay? But another thing most Americans don't know about Mark Twain and Melville Fuller is that the two men bore a very strong resemblance to one another. Indeed, so greatly did the two men favor each other in appearance that they could have been brothers, to those who did not know either man. Many people mistook Mark Twain to be Melville Fuller himself. One woman, in fact, accosted Twain on the street, apologizing to him, saying that she'd never met the Chief Justice of the United States before. And indeed, Twain, being the typical sarcastic humorist that he was, gave the woman an autograph upon request. And he wrote, "It is good to be full, but it is heavenly to be fuller. I am cordially yours, Melville W. Fuller." Now, I don't recall anyone ever mistaking Fuller to be Mark Twain or what he would have thought about the comparison. But, in all likelihood, he probably would have taken it in stride to be compared with such a famous writer and publisher of the day. Arguably, Mark Twain was much more well known by the average American, even in that time period, than Fuller was. Okay, Mark Twain was a legend in his own time. Okay. Aside from, bearing a great resemblance to one another, Twain and Fuller also lived lifespans that were almost identical. Fuller was born in February of 1833 and died in July 4th, to be specific, of 1910, age 77. Twain was born in November of 1835, about 2 years and 9 months after Fuller, and died in April of 1910, 3 months before Fuller, at the age of 74, going on 75. Okay. Now, aside from their general appearance and their relatively comparable lifespans, the two men, however, were very different, very, very different in their politics. Fuller, like I mentioned earlier, was a staunch Democratic politician, very, very conservative man when it came to racial issues, economic policy, and the other pressing issues of the time. Whereas Twain was, a remarkably liberal guy, in spite of being born in the South and, with some of the, training that you would expect from a man born in the South during the antebellum period. His family owned one slave, but they had to sell that slave to make ends meet and do a lot of other necessary things in order to pay the bills. But, Twain, unlike many Southerners, did not absorb the racial hatred that was commonplace. In fact, he paid the full tuition for two African Americans to attend university. Okay. And Twain remarked, he knew very well how things were, that, it was impossible for non-whites in this country to receive true justice. Not a statement you would expect from a white guy born and raised in the South. All right. Twain was a very progressive man when it came to race relations, women's suffrage, and other, notable issues of the day. All right. Certainly in stark contrast to Fuller, who was anything but that. Fuller was extremely conservative, being one of the members of the court who voted to affirm racial segregation presented in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. All right. He was on the wrong side of history there, as well as in many other notable decisions, including Lochner versus New York. All right. Where he voted to strike down the New York state law regulating bakers' working hours. Fuller was just entirely on the wrong side of history. And a statue in Maine that was put there to honor his legacy was removed last year, thanks to his very unfortunate vote to affirm state-sponsored racial segregation in Plessy versus Ferguson. All right, it was removed in 2020. All right, so it is not surprised that most Americans have never heard of Melville Fuller. Like I said, his legacy on the court was relatively underwhelming and full of bad decisions. All right. Like I said, his greatest contribution was the promotion of collegiality with his fellow justices and among his fellow justices. But in terms of his historical legacy, he is a very low-ranked Chief Justice by most, except if you are one of those people who are against regulation of the economy in any way, shape, or form, unless it promotes corporations. But I noticed that many of his staunch defenders don't mention his vote in Plessy versus Ferguson. Conveniently, indeed. All right. But, if I had my choice, I personally would argue that Mark Twain would have made a much better Chief Justice than Melville Fuller. All right. Twain would have been a better justice on his worst day than Fuller on his best day. A man like Twain would certainly have brought a refreshing perspective to the Supreme Court, in spite of the fact that he had no formal training in the law. And like I mentioned earlier with Mark Twain, he was a very pronounced humorist, and some of his quotes, we say today without even knowing that Mark Twain was the originator of them. So if I may, I'd like to read a few of them to you. And I'm guaranteeing they'll make you laugh. All right. So we all know that this is the era of alternative facts and fact checking. Well, Mark Twain has something to say about that. He said, get your facts first. Then you can distort them as you please. Another quote. A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read. Age is an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Go to heaven for the climate, hell for the company. Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress, but I repeat myself. It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. And last but not least, my favorite Mark Twain quote, quitting smoking is easy. I've done it 1,000 times. Great guy indeed. So that about wraps this up, this comparison of Mark Twain and Melville Fuller, who looked just alike, but were very, 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 very different men in virtually every way that you can imagine. All right. So if you have any questions or controversies, leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. I thank you so much for listening to this video. Hope you learned a thing or two from it. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now. I would greatly appreciate it. Just hit that little red subscribe button, and we're in business. It doesn't cost you a thing, and you add to my follower base, you know. If you'd like to donate to my YouTube channel, links are provided on the main page. All right, your support, financially and otherwise, is appreciated more than you'll ever know. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.